Great Western. Czasami, gdy w nocy budzi
The
mnie...
poems have been written over a very long period of time in Polish, all of them. I think in the course of about 20 years.
Great Western. Czasami, gdy w nocy budzi mnie łoskot pociągu za oknem, zaczynam się nagle zapuszczać w to miasto. Kiedy przyjeżdża następny skład linii Great Western, znowu jestem znikąd. Wrastam od nowa.
Great Western. Some nights, woken by the rumble of a train past my window, I begin to scout this city. When the next Great Western hurries by, again I am from nowhere, taking root anew.
They were translated into English by 4 wonderful translators and wonderful friends. One of them is here with us today, Maria Jastrzębska. The other 3 were MARTA DZIUROSZ, ELŻBIETA WÓJCIK-LEESE, and DANUSIA STOK. All of them really great translators. And then those, I think 51 poems, if I remember correctly, were kind of passed on, the English versions, to Lisa Kalu, my partner and wife and a wonderful photographer. And she created a set of photos inspired by those poems. Now, the idea was that the photos are not necessarily illustrative, that she has a completely free reign. And we didn't try to, even though there is the same number of photos and poems in the book, we didn't try to organize the poems and the photos in pairs. It's all a bit more loose than that. So the book was written in Polish and then translated into English, and that's what made it a bilingual book. But it also was a wonderful experience for me of collaboration with a lot of wonderful women. They were all women. So me and Lisa, the photographer, 4 translators and 2 editors of the book. Maria Jastrzębska edited the English version and Violetta Grek has edited the Polish version of the book. So it was all a big network of women working together. Amazing experience for me, I have to say. Maria, how was it for you?
Well, it was amazing for me too. I mean, I jumped at the chance. I was delighted to both edit and also do some translations. Not that they were easy, but translation never is. And I think, there's this kind of persistent myth that as an artist, as a writer, translator, poet, you're supposed to live in your lonely garret and produce great works. And there's a huge kind of isolation that we all experience as writers. And so this just cut right across that, and it was very exciting because here we were working together on a project with, as you say, all these women writers and translators, and that's very important to me, and I've loved working. I always love working with you. I think as a migrant writer, I'm hungry for reflections of my own experience, my own reality. So hearing other voices inspires me in turn and helps me to voice my own experience, and then I'm no longer working in a complete cultural vacuum. So it was really exciting to do it. It's lovely to revisit it with you today.
Emigracja. Uciekłam przed domem. Dogonił.
Emigration. I escaped home. It caught up.
So how did you approach this whole translation with, the different poems, the different types, the contrasts, the sounds of it? What were you looking for in translation-wise?
In one way, it was easy editing the book because all the translators that I was working with are so skilled and so experienced. So, you know, the material was going to be good. I think the problem I had was that Anka's poetry in this book, it's quite deceptively simple in places. So you get these little short poems and you're always waylaid by that as a translator because you think, oh, that's nice and short. I'll do that quickly. And of course, that is a rookie mistake because short poems are notoriously difficult to translate. They're also very difficult to write because every single word counts. So what you're aiming for is to translate it in such a way that you've caught the spirit of what you think the poet is saying. So you want to be faithful to that spirit, but you don't want to be so faithful that it comes out sort of, you know, clunky and too literal a translation. And you do have to kind of recreate something yourself. It's got to be a poem. You know, you're not translating something from a business journal. You're translating language that is alive and magical. And so you're reaching for that in the same way that the poet was reaching for that. And the simplicity just leads you astray because, of course, simplicity is never simple.
It was only when I moved to Britain and lived here for a good few years that I got the courage, I guess, to try to put this set together and find a publisher for it. So I don't know if it's being misplaced and living outside of the language that I wrote those poems did it. Maybe that, maybe not, I don't know, but that's what happened. I didn't have the guts to do it when I was still living in Poland for some reason.
Was there a connecting link?
I think now when I look at this book, it's very much a book about my memories, my childhood growing up. It's very nostalgic. When I take this book into my hand now, it's like going on a trip down memory lane, visiting my grandma, who was very much a formative character. Like, I guess I'm not very unique in this respect. For a lot of us, grandmas are very important figures in our lives, and definitely my grandmas, both of them were. And there is a lot, my grandma, especially one of them, in this book. So I think in a sense, it is a book of an immigrant, of a foreigner living far away from the home country and going back there. But that's how I read those poems now. But like as I said earlier, they were actually written over a very long period of time. So most of them, or a big part of that book, was actually written when I was still living in Poland. But I read them differently now, I guess.
Wakacje u babci. Wysoka wierzba tańczyła na wietrze. Jej witek można było dotknąć z huśtawki. Wystarczyło mocno się rozbujać. Dalej rósł orzech, na którym zbudowaliśmy cały świat. Jego owoce babcia suszyła w tekturowej walizce. Na strychu. Podkradaliśmy. Na środku podwórka wiśnia. Ciemnokrwiste owoce brudziły palce, język i duszę. W rogu wkopana w ziemię piwniczka na ziemniaki. Za domem druga, której chłód zawsze pachniał jabłkami rozłożonymi pojedynczo na półkach. Do bramy prowadził rząd akacji. Wspinaliśmy się na nią i z tej wieży strażniczej oglądaliśmy przewijający się film. Tego wszystkiego już nie ma. Spełniła się groźba ciemnej studni między akacjami a chlewem.
Holidays at Grandma's. A tall willow tree rocked in the wind. You could touch its catkins from the swing, just needed to get it going hard enough. Further down there was a walnut tree. We built an entire world on it. Grandma used to dry its fruits in a cardboard suitcase in the attic. We scrumped them. A sour cherry in the middle of the yard, fruits the colour of dark blood. They stained fingers, tongues and souls. In the corner, a root cellar for storing potatoes. Another one at the side of the house, its dankness smelling of apples, spread in single layers on shelves. A row of acacia trees led to the gate. We climbed it, and from our watchtower gaped at the film unwinding. All gone now. Too true, the curse of the dark well between the acacia trees and pigsty.
Going back to the translation, you're looking for the same kind of simplicity. There's like hidden depths because they're very short. How did you?
Sometimes, I mean, because I did a rough translation of all of the poems myself, just for the practical reasons. I needed something for Lisa, the photographer, to work with. So when I was doing those rough translations, sometimes they were, like Maria said, they were too literal. They were basically drafts. But in some other places, I was trying to find a way for the English versions to sound a little bit similar to Polish. But I didn't really do much of that in this book. I explore that idea a bit further in my next book. But in this book, I kind of handed it over to the 4 translators who've done a wonderful job. I mean, it was an amazing experience, to being a translator myself, to be in a position when somebody takes my writing and works on it and comes with their version. And this, what I hear often as a translator from a lot of writers, that if they know the language, the target language, that, they have this almost schizophrenic experience, like the split, because it's their text, but it's not their text. It's underneath the base layer, it's still their text, whatever text it is. But the actual outcome is not. Somebody else has written it, created it. They are the author of it. So that was my experience with this book, with having those translations done by Maria and the 3 other translators. It was, the English texts are mine and they are not mine at the same time. It's like looking at your doppelganger.
That's such a good way of putting it, because I have that experience as well when I've been translated into Polish, because I write predominantly in English, but I've had exactly that experience, so I know what you're talking about. And I think also the challenge for the translator, because your poems, the tone of them is very much a kind of speaking voice. It's not airy-fairy, it's conversational, not exactly like normal speech because it has the magic of poetry, but it's quite direct and it's you talking. And so the translator has to somehow capture your voice. And there's always this tension because you want to render it into conversational, ordinary, normal English that is going to sound right and familiar to the reader in English. But also you want to keep some of the fact that this is a Polish voice. It's not an English voice. You're not a Liverpudlian, you're not a Cockney. You're something very uniquely you in Polish. So you've got to somehow capture the foreignness while making it sound natural in English and not sort of sound like weird translationese. And it's a very fine balance. And that's part of the challenge and makes it exciting and difficult all at the same time.
Maria, is it actually the reason why you pepper your own writing with Polish often, but also Spanish and other languages, to retain that element of foreignness, to maybe throw the reader out of their comfort zone a little bit and to point in the direction of, okay, this other place, this other language, this other way of thinking, because language is mentality, isn't it? Is that why you do it in your own writing?
I think that's true, yes, because I do feel like I'm dealing in otherness a lot of the time. And I think I'm greedy for language. One language just does not feel enough for me because of my experience, because I've always lived between cultures and I still do. And I'm always interpreting between people of different culture, sexuality or viewpoint, and I'm sure we'll come on to that. But I feel like I'm always between cultures. So one language just feels inadequate to me. English is my dominant language because I grew up here. I came here when I was a lot younger than when you arrived. So English has become the language I'm most flexible in, if you like. but it isn't enough. And so I do bring in all sorts of other things. The Spanish was a very cheeky thing to bring in because I'm not a Spanish speaker, but I wanted, something different. And the landscape I was writing about was quite a Hispanic landscape, so that fitted. I often do, include Polish, and sometimes I make things up, like, as you know, I've written in Ponglish, which is a mixture of Polish and English. So yeah.
I have to say, because I've been working on a translation of Maria's into Polish, and there's one poem from that set written in Ponglish, translating that into Polish.
I don't know how you're doing it.
I haven't arrived at the solution yet, I'm sure. It's quite something.
Well,
That's really interesting.
Ponglish is such fun because what you're playing with is the sounds. And so you make all these, they call it false friends, translators
Yes.
call it false friends. So you're making links between words that actually don't mean the same, but that sound similar. And of course, to a poet, that's a real gift because it's like a form of rhyming, if you like. You're bringing together different meanings, different connotations under one umbrella. And so all kinds of things jump out and you make new links. And that's fantastic for a poet if you make a new link, because everything that we write, someone has written it all before anyway. So you're always trying to look for something different. So I've done a lot of that, bringing together a word that sounds similar to a Polish, in English, that sounds similar to a Polish word. But how you do that in reverse, I have no idea. I sympathise.
I'm trying same in reverse, but easy it is not, no.
And I think you've started doing this as well,
Yeah.
haven't you?
Yes. Inspired by you. No, but it's good fun actually. It's like being in a playground and suddenly having a new set of toys to play with, and you can do whatever you want with it. Yeah. I was thinking Maria, because I know that you always say that English is your dominant language, but Polish is your first language. And you said earlier that you're kind of stretched. One language is not enough for you. Do you think that this feeling of being a stranger to one's language, whether it's the first language or the dominant language, it doesn't really matter. Is that something that creatively can be a useful tool? Does it help you or does it make it harder?
I think I've made it help me. I don't know whether it helps everyone, but I think it is a very interesting place to be in. I think all poets, whether they're monolingual or multilingual, and even within monolingual, people are going to have known their dialect or a little word that was used by their granny or something. So nobody's really monolingual, I don't think. But I think for all poets, there's a sort of sense of looking from the outside in. And I think that is a very creative place. And I also think the other thing about poetry, it's not reportage, it's not, a journalistic inquiry. You're trying to reach for something a bit different. You're trying to reach for the things you can't say in words. Mm. So there's always a sense of transcending language. You're trying to say the unsayable or the unspeakable. And that's a particular project, isn't it? And I think being a stranger to interrogating your own language is helpful, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, no, it does. I was just trying to see if you, because it does work like that for me. It kind of, this feeling of being a stranger to the language. In my case, it's more clear cut, obviously, because my first language is Polish and I don't know if it's my dominant language these days. You see, I'm getting lost. Those boundaries are getting a little bit blurry, but definitely, I still use Polish. I translate into Polish. I write in Polish as well, although less and less, I have to say, which saddens me a bit, I have to say too. But this feeling of being a stranger in the language, in this case English, I think it's a very good, uncomfortable feeling. It kind of makes you makes you look around and look at things from a slightly different perspective, makes you investigate yourself.
Yeah.
What you do, how you say things. And I'm not just talking about being correct in English or not. I mean, let's put that aside. I'm just talking about expressing myself. I have also mentioned that being in this slightly uncomfortable position of a stranger within a language and culture gave me more courage, strangely, to do things also in Polish, so to publish this first book, which I didn't before. And I think it's a very fertile, creative situation to be in. So just wanted to check if it works the same way for you.
Absolutely. I think it's always good to be questioning. And I think that's what we do. We question. And it's a kind of contradiction because on the one hand, we love language. I'm passionate about language. You know, I'm obsessed with language. And on the other hand, I recognize its inadequacy. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's just, you know, you want so much to say something and you just think, oh, these words, they're useless. They can't get this across. And that's the challenge, isn't it? So you have to keep asking questions. And I think the whole, you know, outsider, stranger thing, it makes you question everything. It makes you question the language, the culture, all the assumptions, and that gives you fresh eyes. And that is fertile, you're right.
And Anna, you mentioned you're doing a similar thing. Are you using like Polish, English, and what other languages?
I'm also exploring the languages historically spoken in the little part of the world where I come from, which is on the Baltic coast in Poland. And the languages spoken there historically were German, Polish, of course, but also Kashubian and Yiddish. And I speak a little bit of German, not much, but I don't know Kashubian. I don't know Yiddish. But I'm still interested to see, to kind of find a way to show that this place had all those different personalities. Because like I said earlier, I really, really believe that language is a mentality and way of thinking. And I also see myself that my personality changes when I change from Polish to English and English to Polish. I'm a different person.
Totally.
Not drastically maybe, but yes, there are differences and other people see it too. I'm sure, Maria, you've had that experience as well.
Totally.
So, yeah. So you know, to know that there is this one part of the world where, you know, those languages historically were spoken, some of them at the same time, some of them at different times in history, it kind of adds those layers. And I'm interested in scratching. I can't speak those languages, but I can scratch a little bit and I can try to see a little bit what's maybe underneath, what's the next layer and the next one after that. So that's what I've been doing recently. And I've done a bit of that in the new book, but that's Polish-English. I'm not bringing other languages into that. But again, like Maria, I'm trying to sometimes create two versions, but sometimes clash them, sometimes create some kind of clash that will bring something new to the surface. That's maybe in neither of those languages, but by meeting those. It also, I think, it's my attempt to show how a brain of a person like me, like Maria, to a point, works between different cultures, between different languages. The person who doesn't belong really nowhere fully. I always say that once you move from one place to another, and I'm not talking about moving to the next street, you're always from in between. You never fully belong. You don't belong to the place you come from. You don't belong to the new place. And that's okay. But it's also interesting because it creates, you know, your brain works differently by switching, for example, from one language to another, back and forth. And especially if you're a translator, you do it all the time. You know, you mentioned about finding a word in Spanish, for example, that is not easy to translate, but is exactly perfect for that sentence, that what you're trying to say. Well, my brain does it all the time, that it switches between Polish and English, and I don't even sometimes realize it, that I do it. And then somebody else who is on the receiving end is like, what? Yeah. Because I switched. And it's not, you know, because my brain decided that this other language will work better here, will fit the situation better. And so what I was trying to do in this new book, which is called Deliverance, I was trying to create a portrait of that, of how my brain works, or brain of any bilingual or multilingual person, of any foreigner living in a foreign country. But that's the next book. In Café, there is less of that because, like I said, the book was written in Polish. However, there are quite a few poems there about the immigrant experience as well. But they were written in Polish and then translated into English. I think Great Western is one of them, which portrays the kind of life of an immigrant in the UK.
It's a beautiful poem.
Currently, do you find that there's one language you're more likely to find yourself writing in, or do you find the switch is just balanced between the two?
English. And maybe it's because I constantly take part in some poetry workshops and courses, and they happen to take place in this country, so I write in English, but I actually want to make more effort because I don't want to lose my Polish, and I want it more than just a peppering in my writing, I think. But yeah, recently it's been way more in English than Polish, I have to say. Yeah.
And what do you find yourself writing most about in poetry?
This new book, I mentioned using those strategies, writing bilingually and this immigrant's brain, but it's also about growing up gay in Poland in the 80s. It's a thematic book, and I wanted it to be like that because of what has been going on in Poland for the last few years in terms of LGBT rights. It's hopefully now starting to improve. So I'm a bit late with the book, but but no, Maria is saying no, not too late. You're right, because there's always, there are always these are issues that we can't, I think, take for granted, and we have to talk about them. So yeah, thematically, that's what this book is about, which was maybe a little bit, those issues were way more hidden actually in Café, because I don't think it reads like a book written by a gay person, Café. It's not there, obviously. Maria is disagreeing. Come on, Maria.
Well, it's all about whether you are implicit or explicit in poetry. And it's something you and I talk about, isn't it? I know that with my own work, sometimes people kind of miss the LGBTQ queer resonances in it. I think that's because I'm Polish, because I've got this Polish surname, because I write about things, for example, like war or childhood, or, I think, we've got a publishing industry which increasingly looks for an angle. Yeah. This book is about this. And so people latch on to one thing and it becomes this either or. So it was either a Polish book or it's a queer book. And, to me, it's obvious that these are all just different parts of myself as they are for you. And I don't think a gay book has to sort of spell it out necessarily. It's gay because that's your perspective. It's part of what informs you. But I think because of what's happened in Poland in the last decade, I mean, there's been a level of hatred and prejudice and ignorance as well that's, been orchestrated by the previous government. It's made it a very dangerous situation for a lot of LGBTQ people. And I think for both of us, that's made us want to be more explicit for that audience, because you don't want to be pigeonholed, but on the other hand, you don't want to be erased and you don't want to be invisible. And I think that's also a tension in all our writing. And certainly for me, because I've been living here, I live in Brighton, which is the gay capital of the UK, because I'm of the age where we fought very hard for a long time for LGBTQ rights, and we've achieved a certain level particularly for lesbians, gay men or bisexual people. I think for the trans community, it's still very different in the UK. So there's certain things I've been able to take as read and not feel, I've got to be explicit about living here. But I think the Polish context, the Polish situation has made me think, actually, those things sadly still need saying and need to be saying loudly. And then you want to shout out loud because you don't want to be overlooked or rendered invisible. And I think that's what's happened to you, hasn't it? You've talked about that,
Yes.
about wanting to have that voice, particularly in Poland.
Yes. Yes, and that's one of the reasons also why the book is still bilingual, because I wanted, in a sense, more important for me for the book to come out in Poland than here, because I wanted to make a stance, because I was angry. That book is really written with a lot of anger, because I remember when I was at uni in the 90s in Warsaw, that was early 90s. That's the time when it was still drab and grey and poor, and everything, hasn't changed much since the communist times in terms of our life, our everyday life. But there was hope, and I had this naive feeling that it will take time, but things will change, and they can only change. There's only one direction for change. And I also was thinking about things like LGBT rights, women's rights, and things like that, not just money and prosperity.
Yeah.
And then the history has proven me wrong. The history showed that things can go backwards, and rapidly, very quickly. And it was really scary what was happening in Poland under this thankfully now previous government. So that's when I felt I need to write this book. I need to shout out this anger of mine and be very explicit for a change. Yes, after that first book, which is, yes, if you define a gay writer by a writer who is gay, then that book is gay. But if you define a gay writer by a writer who writes about gay issues explicitly, then Café is not. But yeah, question of definition.
Going back a little bit, you mentioned the Hispanic landscape. Was that the inspiration, or do you often use Spanish?
No, that's the first time I've ever used Spanish. That was in a particular book called The True Story of Cowboy Hat and Ingenue, and it was a kind of work of fiction in poetry where I created some imaginary characters. And
beautiful book.
Thanks.
Love it.
They were imaginary characters, but the landscape that they were in was partly inspired by travelling that I'd done both in Spain and also in California. So I had been inspired by the landscape, but I'd also created these two characters and then interwoven their story with stories of other people. And the things I was drawing on were my understanding of the Spanish Civil War, my understanding of Spanish immigrants in America, and all kinds of things. But basically, it was an imaginary place. And because it was an imaginary place and because it was other, it needed a different language. And Polish didn't seem right there because it just didn't feel like a Polish landscape. Although I think, sorry, this is going to sound so complicated, I think it's quite a Polish book because it's a bit surreal and because of the way it's written in these prose poems. So to me, it feels very Polish inside, but actually the surroundings that I'm describing and the way people talk and the way they look and the way they behave isn't Polish, and what they eat isn't Polish at all. I don't know if that makes any sense.
It's fascinating and colourful.
Well, a friend said it was like a spaghetti western, and I think that was a good description.
I love it, yeah. Do you have something you could point to and say, well, this inspired me to do this? I had this image, I had this picture come from something, or was it spontaneous?
It was very strange. I was in Spain and I was just jotting down some notes, just writing a sort of scribble as you often do. You sometimes start and you don't really know what you're going to write about. And it was noontime, which is a real cliche in cowboy films, as you know. And so I was just writing about noon, and then these characters just popped up, very sketchy, and it was just a little sort of something. It was nothing really, and I thought, oh, I don't know what I'll do with that. Oh, I'll probably just chuck it. And then, but then I persisted with it, and then suddenly, and I was supposed to be writing a completely different book at the time, and I had to put that on hold, and this one just took over, and they started, you know, galloping across imaginary prairies or something, and off they went.
Wonderful.
And Anka, again, I don't know how she's managed to put it into Polish, but she's a magician, so she has.
Oh, it sounds like stream of consciousness.
Well, I think stream of consciousness can be a starting point. Obviously, then later on you have to edit and craft and shape things. But yeah, I think poems, I don't know about you, Anka, how you start writing poems, but sometimes you just start with something and you have absolutely no idea where it's going to go. And I think that's quite healthy. I think if you have too strong an idea of where it's going to go, then you kill the creativity and the spontaneity. So you do need to explore as a writer and take risks.
I often start with just one line. I wake up with one line, and then, you know, and then I build up on it and around it and kind of see if it takes me somewhere. Yeah.
Anna, you mentioned Kashubian. Do you have an example you could share about using it?
Kashubian is a language which is kind of half Polish, half German. So usually when it comes to vocabulary, it takes you either in this or that direction. But I think I wrote, I have one poem in this book, which has Kashubian. And it's all based on the idea of coming out. So the whole poem has words for wardrobe or closet in different languages, in those languages spoken historically there. So we have a Kashubian ruchnionka and szpinio. And we have a German Schrank. And we have Yiddish Schafe and Almer. And then Polish Szafa and garderoba. So these are all words meaning more or less the same, wardrobe or closet, in one of the languages historically spoken there, Kashubian, German, Yiddish, and Polish. There were others as well, smaller ones, but I didn't go there.
I love the way that you're exploring those heritages, and I love the way that you're texturing things, because it's a coming out poem, and it's also an inquiry into language and culture. I think that's so exciting.
It is very exciting. Also, the Kashubian itself, when I was growing up there in the 80s, it was a dead language. That's what we were told. That, you know, nobody speaks Kashubian anymore, nobody writes in Kashubian, etc., etc. It's back. Now people learn to speak it. Now people write in it. There is even a poet who writes in Polish and Kashubian from the same town that I'm from. They have schools where they teach in Kashubian. They publish newspapers. It's amazing. It's beautiful to watch. Because I remember it so vividly as a kid being taken to, you know, this. It's really where my parents still live. And we used to go out on little excursions often with my parents. And I remember this trip to a little, like a museum village on the Baltic coast by the dunes. There are big moving dunes there, and in this museum there was a little bit of information about Kashubian, and that's how it was presented. It's dead, it's gone, it's done and dusted. So to see it making a comeback now it's just wonderful. It's just wonderful. So I don't speak the language. I'm not planning to learn it, but I can still, you know, scratch that surface a little bit and see what's there. It's wonderful experience, I think. So yes, that's Kashubian. So Great Western was translated by ELżBIETA WÓJCIK-LEESE, and this poem and another one called Emigration, translated by MARTA DZIUROSZ, are about, well, being an immigrant in the UK and this experience of not rooting, not taking root really, which I guess it's a very, common experience for people coming to a different country. And then we have Holidays at Grandma's, translated by Maria Jastrzębska. And that's very much, I mentioned Grandma as my formative character. And I used to spend holidays in the countryside at my grandma's pretty much every year as a child. And it was wonderful. It was this magical, countryside idyll with some dark moments too. That's in the poem as well, as Maria knows. But yes, very much trip down memory lane. And then there's another one, also translated by Maria Jastrzębska, called Stripping Wallpaper. And that's basically describes renovating a flat, which I bought when I moved from London to Ramsgate. And this idea of all that history that's there, because it was an old building going back to Victorian times. And thinking about all the people who lived there, and actually not just lived there, because it used to be a pub. So thinking about all the people who used to come there and have a drink and chat and, I don't know, have a brawl maybe, whatever people did do. So that's Stripping Wallpaper.
Zrywanie tapet. Stare życia śpią warstwami, schowane przed wzrokiem. Para wodna obnaża ich kleisty zapach. Ręka drży za każdym razem, gdy mam zerwać kolejną płachtę. Naga ściana pod spodem opowiada zupełnie inną historię.
Stripping wallpaper. Layers of old lives sleep hidden out of sight. Steam reveals their sticky smell. My hand trembles every time I start to peel another piece. Bare wall underneath tells an altogether different story.
Again, kind of trip down memory lane, but not my memory necessarily, not my history, other histories.
But it's a very resonant poem, I think, and it relates to lots of what we've been talking about, because first of all, in the Polish context, in the context of Poland, there have been so many changes. People have been displaced and moved. The residents of different houses have changed, whether it's, Jewish people who lost their homes, whether it's people who were displaced from east to west. There's been a lot of migration sort of within Poland. So there's all those kind of layers of who used to live here. And then I think also it's like a kind of embedded metaphor for everything we've been saying about language. Because we're questioning language, you talked about scratching the surface and finding hidden languages or disused, languages that have been destroyed or abandoned. And I think it's very much about that. And also, we've been talking about identities and who we are under the surface. What's not explicit, what's hidden, or what's been deliberately glossed over, covered over, erased. So I think that poem really speaks to everything in your creative project. And it's a poem about writing as well as about living and as well as about literal renovation and all of that. So I think it's a very strong poem and a very resonant poem. You could also maybe, Anka, say something about the title.
Oh yeah, the title.
Yes.
That was, I'm never going to do that again. The longest title ever. Difficult to pronounce in both languages. A tongue twister almost. But it all came out of one of the poems. And I think it was an early conversation with Violetta Gregg. And she liked the poem and she said, oh, that would be a good title. So I it stuck in my mind. And I did not listen to any advice of people who are saying, no, it's too long, it's too complex, it's too complicated, it's too long, it's too difficult to pronounce. And now I myself call the book Café because I just can't go through the Café by Van St. James's in the Fields Lunchtime or Kawiarnia przy St. James's Rena w porze lunchu. It's really long.
But it's very filmic.
It is.
So at events when people like, it's just too much. It's too much. It's not only long but difficult to read out. It's just I don't think I've had one event where people actually said the title of the book correctly. There's always something. There's somebody stumbles somewhere in the middle or just gives up or whatever. So. Yes, yeah. I don't think I'm ever doing it again.
What was it like when
sure.
Lisa started producing the images? What was that like for you?
It was an amazing experience because, and also, we were both worried because we never worked together before. That was our first project together, and it can backfire. You can well imagine that, working with your partner on a creative project together. Not necessarily the easiest thing, but it was surprisingly smooth. The poems came first, as I said earlier, but then we agreed, we discussed it that Lisa has a completely free range, she can do whatever she wants. But then we were she was showing me photos as she was creating them. Obviously there was way more than ended up in the book, and it was a good experience. We've already that next book, Deliverance, is also with Lisa's photography, so that's a proof of successful collaboration between the two partners. The first one was a really, really good, inspiring experience. It was like hours and hours, you can imagine, of conversations about, this, that, and the other, this photo, that poem, what to do, what to put in the book, what to take out of the book. It was non-stop for a couple of months really, and it was great. We also have because the photography is as important part of the book as are the poems. That was the idea from the beginning. We also wanted to give some spotlight to the photography outside of the book itself. So Lisa's done a few exhibitions locally and in London with the photos from the book. We've done one little installation, which was like multimedia installation with videos, but also audio recordings from the book, because we wanted to highlight the fact that it's not just a poetry book with photos. The photos are as important there. That's why Lisa is listed as the co-author of the book. I insisted that it's this way. I didn't want it to be my book illustrated by Lisa, because that wouldn't reflect the process, that wouldn't reflect how we worked on the book and what we wanted to achieve. So we're probably gonna end up with a similar setup with the second book, as I said.
You had different people translating different poems.
Yes.
You mentioned how brilliant they were, the translators. Do all the poems share the voice that you say, yes, this is me speaking?
I think they do, and it's probably thanks to a brilliant editor who worked on it. I really do think that. So, yeah, I do recognize myself in those poems. It's not like it's completely alien. It's not quite me, but it's me.
So, Maria, what did you find between these different translations? Were you able to find a unifying voice, or did you have to edit to make that voice?
I didn't have to do massive edits by any means, because, as I say, the translators were experienced. and very skilled. I guess I was trying to make sure that there was a cohesive whole and a consistency to the voice. I think there was a lot of cohesion, and my job was to sort of bring that out. And I did make some edits which the translators were gracious enough to accept, but it wasn't a big heavy-handed edit that I had to do by any means.
Yeah, because you mentioned at the beginning that these were all translated by friends, people you've known for quite some time.
Yes, which I think I was just about to add it, that it might have been a factor, because these are quite personal poems. They are about me. So probably the fact that the translators knew me didn't hurt. It could only have helped. What do you think, Maria? Am I...
Yeah, I'm sure that certainly added to the warmth of the project. But they're also all people who operate between two languages. And you chose Polish translators. Because sometimes when a book is translated, you know, you might have a collaboration between the speaker of the language and then the native speaker, so to speak. Sorry, that's a lot of speaks. But in this case, they were all Poles who speak both languages. So I think they all had a very good understanding of Polish, a very lived understanding of Polish. But all of them had lived in England or abroad, away from Poland, for a long time. So they also had that very natural command of English. So I think the dog's joining in.
The dog.
He wants to add his notes as well.
Yeah.
So I think I was working with women who know Polish very well, but also who know English very well. And also, I think all of them have an experience of that between cultures life that Anna and I share. So in that sense, we had a lot in common as a team working on translating these poems. You didn't have to explain any of that to anybody because it was a given. And I think that made my job much easier.
It was a wonderful experience, this whole women collaborating on a project. Not because it was my poetry. I mean, that didn't, I didn't think that. But it's this kind of, I don't know how to describe it. There was this generosity that came with it. That
synchronicity.
Yes, that you don't always get it when you're collaborating with other people. Maybe it's because we knew each other and liked each other. Maybe more. Maybe there were some other aspects to that. But it was an amazing, thrilling experience.
Wonderful.
Well, there was warmth and there was mutual respect, and I was very honoured to be part of it.
Honour is all mine.